So what a treat to be here in the Ulster showroom. But actually, this event is not only an Ulster Carpets event. It's an event by 5 British manufacturing commercial interior furniture suppliers who are actually all Commercial Interiors UK members, which is absolutely fantastic. So you're welcomed here today by Ulster Carpets, Panaz, Sanderson, Hypnos, and Newmor Wallcoverings. And their teams are all here to have a chat with you whilst we all enjoy some food and drink afterwards. My name's Alice Bryan. I'm the editorial director of online magazine Design Insider. And as I know most of you know, Design Insider is the media partner of Trade Association Commercial Interiors UK. And actually, our team is also here this evening. So if you have any questions about how your business could benefit from membership, obviously, we are all happy to have a chat with you about that. Or if you'd like to talk about the work that we do with Design Insider, then obviously come over and say hi. As you can tell, I'm not sat here alone. I'm here with 4 absolutely fantastic speakers, and we're here to talk about materiality. We're going to talk about it in line with British manufacturing and how that relates to sustainability. We're going to talk for maybe about 40 minutes. And then when we've finished our conversation, we're going to open it out to you. So let me introduce my speakers. Welcome, Jack Pringle, MD of Studio Pringle and Chair of the Reba Board. Welcome. Welcome, Sam Hall, Director, Interior Design Europe for IHG Hotels and Resorts. Welcome, Sam. And welcome, Tom Thorogood, Partner and Co-Head of Interiors at Studio Moren. And Joanna Knight, welcome, Co-Founder of the Sustainable Design Collective. So we're going to just start our conversation and leap in with a look at going beyond surface level messaging when it comes to sustainability. Sam, why is it so important to go beyond the sort of keywords and those words we're so overfamiliar with now, like sustainability?
Well, we actually did a talk earlier as well, which fundamentally you either believe we're going into global warming or you don't. You know, it's what you one or the other. There's been a lot of chat. It's there's a global kind of a sigh every time you say the word sustainability, but really it's environmental. It's everything. You've got to do something. You know, it's all talk. You've got to take action. Just make some small changes, and there's we can make a huge difference if we all just do one little thing.
And you have a new phrase, a new go-to.
My new go-to is designing sustainability in and designing waste and impact out.
That's one for everybody to work towards and weave into their conversations as well. Jo, perhaps you could pick the conversation up there. In what way is the language you're using diluting the impact of some of our sustainability sort of initiatives and actions?
Well, before I answer your question, I would like to point out that today is the UK Global Overshoot Day. So basically that's the day that we have used up our allocation of the world's ecological resources. And so from now onwards, this country's on borrowed time. And what makes it even harder is the fact that it was in June last year and July the year before. So we're not getting better, we're getting worse. So the talk about sustainability is good, because unless we're thinking about it, we're not doing anything about it. I like the definition of sustainability being people, planet, and profit, because whether we like it or not, I know some people have turned the P, profit, into something beyond commercial profit, but I do think it's important because ultimately we have to make a way of doing these changes which actually are viable, because we all have to earn money. Well, most of us do, myself included. So I just think we need to really focus on what are we doing? And we can't just keep making new things, even if they're marginally better than the previous iteration, and then throwing it away. It's not viable. Yeah. So I guess that was my big message.
No, that's great. That's fantastic. Well, actually, audience, you don't get away quite so lightly. I've got a few audience questions. It's hands up for yes, and then hands up for no. So my first one is, have you ever felt unsure whether material marketed as sustainable truly was? Yes? Okay. No. Which one? Okay. So perhaps that is something that so many of you have already experienced. So now let's move on to a slightly more positive note, I suppose. Tom, coming to you, what does meaningful collaboration between designers and manufacturers really look like?
So I think, working with Ulster a lot, going to the factory trip last year was really insightful and stuff. So that was good. So actually it's working out things like rug optimization, which was really interesting. So actually all the rugs that we've got within the hotel, actually going back to them and just saying, okay, what do we do in order to fit 2 of these onto one loom? And things like that. And then also if we actually kind of maximum 25 colours for them, like stick to that within one hotel. So actually the all of the public areas, all of the guest rooms are actually within those colours. You can still get a wide range of kind of different colours and different designs, but it just kind of helps the kind of efficiency of the production.
So it's small alterations through that collaboration that enables the production to be more sustainable.
Yeah, so it hasn't really had an effect with regards to the creativity. It's purely just kind of seeing what we can actually do to improve it and work with the suppliers and not actually put all the pressure on them.
Fantastic, thank you. So Jack, when you're looking at that same question but from an architectural point of view, what does a collaboration between architects and manufacturers look like that's sort of successful?
Sure. I'll come to that in just 1 minute because
I
want to steal some of the other questions first.
Yeah, absolutely.
But, sustainability is a much sort of misunderstood word, as you've said. But 20 years ago, I was involved through the RIBA in supporting this idea of global commons. And that was the idea of getting each country to have their own targets proportionally that they would hit on sustainability. And which is very interesting. And of course, nobody has done it. And the question that I'm asked all the time is, well, why should we bother? We're only 60 million in this country. You've got India and China, 2.5 billion, nearly 3 billion between them, building coal-fired power stations. What we do is minimal compared to all of that. And the answer is, as an advanced economy, as an advanced society, we should set an example.
Yes.
And we should keep setting an example. So in fact, all the small things that we do don't really make a difference in themselves when they're drowned out by coal-fired power stations being built by the day in the East. But long term, as they accumulate, set an example, they absolutely do. So to return to your question.
Yes, that's fine.
I have really enjoyed working with material manufacturers and product manufacturers to modify the components. I've done it on a number of things, furniture and partitions in particular. Actually, when I first started out in a career, we just hated all the partitions that were being built. And we said to one manufacturer, just send us a 50 millimeter length offcut of every standard aluminium section you make, and we'll make you a new system out of it. And we did, and they marketed it, and it was their most successful product for the next 10 years. So that was terrific. Also in desking, I think there was a time when desking manufacturers just thought the way to go was to be more and more complicated and more sophisticated and more expensive. And we worked with those manufacturers to strip their products right back, to cut the cost right down, to make the manufacturer much more easy, and I guess more sustainable as well. And it was huge fun. I mean, to get involved in the manufacturing process is a privilege.
Well, and a learning experience, isn't it? And it's always a joy to learn.
Oh, it's great
more.
to go to a factory.
Yes.
I mean, it really is great. I mean, it's a fabulous day out. So I've always enjoyed that.
And I would say that the manufacturers that have brought us here today really are setting an example in how they can set sustainability goals and reach and exceed those targets. Which leads nicely, Sam, to ask sort of, well, what role does trust and transparency play in that collaborative process between designer and manufacturer?
It's huge. There's a story about this. I was in the Ulster factory, and we're walking around, and there's bags of this dust. I was with Anya and Joey, everybody from YHG. And equally, we've been chatting to Hypnos about how do we make mattresses sustainable. We've calculated we go through 2,000 mattresses globally a week, and that's just IHG. And unfortunately, they don't go to landfill. They're incinerated most of the time, whether it's for energy or not, it's still burning something. So I'm like, I'm sure we could use this dust. Let's make it into a mattress. And there was bags of dust going back and forward, apparently. Everybody's been very polite, and no one came back and just saying it just doesn't work. You're nuts. But it's more the point of it doesn't matter if we're doing it wrong. It's getting everybody chatting and doing something, because that thing that was wrong kind of leads to something else, and we get going, and we get to where we need to be. And also just open and honest about it most of the time. I think it's interesting what you're saying about the aluminium framework. I think designers are problem solvers. And if you give someone the problem, they generally come up with a fantastic solution. The problem is when they're reinventing the wheel and kind of churning out something that's happened before. Yes.
Of course you may.
I
Absolutely.
should take it. I think one of the most shocking things that's happened in recent history is to do with trust in manufacturers. And it's Grenfell, which killed 72 people because we couldn't trust the specification of the materials that were put forward. So trust is absolutely vital, and we don't have good enough testing regimes in this country that we can trust.
Very good point.
Alice, can I jump in?
You can, Joe.
I just want to pull up on the Eastern, so China and India analogy, or mentioning about coal-fired boilers and power stations, sorry. It's not entirely true. There is some tremendous efforts being undertaken. It's just the sheer scale. And India, we also have a sustainable design collective in India, and the work that's being done in terms of sustainability there, I do accept it's the sheer scale is the issue. But let's not be sanctimonious. We ain't great in this country.
Sorry, I had to say something. I think it's fantastic. We're not necessarily here to entirely agree, so it's no problem at all. Tom, do you think that there are occasions where working with UK-based manufacturers means that they can be slightly more agile in allowing designers to co-create?
Not necessarily. I think it's just more about the manufacturer themselves. Like we work on projects all over the world, and it's more about different manufacturers and what they allow you to do with regards to customization, bespoke, anything like that. But all the ones here today are obviously great at it.
Well recovered there. Perfect. Okay, back out for another audience question. So, audience, have you experienced a project where supplier collaboration changed the final design for the better? So, yes, you've collaborated and it's improved it for the better? No, but perhaps you'd like to? Okay, absolutely. Fantastic. Thank you. You would like to more? Yes, okay. So, if we look a little bit at the workplace and some of the workplace trends, Jack, how are they reshaping material expectations in in hospitality design, you know, that sort of grey area and that link between workplace and hospitality?
Yeah, sure. Well, it's going both ways.
Yes.
Because of the hotelification of the workplace and the workplaceification of the hotel, and you can see both. You know, the workplace is becoming much more like sort of the range of amenities that you get in a hotel, and the sort of materials that you might use in hotels come into the workplace, and vice versa. I mean, you go into plenty of hotels. Hoxton's a prime example. Hoxton Hotel is a very busy workplace, and there are workplace materials in that hotel, you know, and workplace products in that hotel. So the whole there is a sort of Venn diagramming or blurring of the boundaries between both sectors, which I think is very nice, actually. Yeah. It adds for a variety in life, and the office is a far less dull place than it was just 20 years ago because of this. And technology has enabled this to a large extent. Yeah. You know, the iPhone, which was invented in 2007 or something, means that you can work from a sofa. You can do all your emails. You can work on the move. So, yes, technology has freed us from being chained to desks, and so we can work in hotels.
Sam, have you found that there have been perhaps suppliers that you've been able to work with that traditionally had been more in the workplace sector? Now there has been a change in hospitality.
I think it's the approach to the method. I think it's, we all need our space to work harder. And to point, we're all commercial. We all have to make money. It's like we love design, but if it was just that, we'd be sat at home. So, when it's an office, we've all come out of lockdown. We've all been working from home. We need this relaxed feel. Equally, we have these hotel lobbies where people are having coffee, and what else can it do? I mean, we did a great project with Newmor, just thinking in Berlin, and we had this, pretty soulless, let's call it, that dining space, and we had some direction stuff. In Newmor, I've came up with a great mural that could be run through the space. Equally, it's really easy to be installed, and it kind of, things spark off different areas. We all look at different spaces, and it triggers off design in different ways. But fundamentally, it's just ease of use. It doesn't matter whether you're in the office or in a hotel. You want to, everything should be easy for you.
Yeah, sort of intuitive.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go back to that topic of joy. And Tom, perhaps, why is it so joyful when designers discover new materials? And what do you really look for when you're looking at new materials?
I think it's always exciting. Like, we as designers kind of love finding new things and working out how we can kind of use them in our designs. And I think it's nice kind of fully understanding kind of the whole story of the product and how they're creating it, and if it's something kind of really innovative or kind of, like fully understanding the product, the process. Like all designers as well, like we both said, like love a factory trip and kind of actually fully understanding kind of the process of something. So
part of what you look at is that sort of in-depth narrative of the material, not just its use, but every element and every layer of where it's come from and how it's
kind of as much as possible, because there's obviously a lot of things that we're specifying within. So a lot of times it's kind of really trusting the supplier, talking to the supplier, and really kind of working with them and collaborating with them. But for lots of like as many of the key elements as well, like really getting that story in and kind of understanding that, which then helps our concept narrative as well as kind of the overall sustainability aspect of the project.
Fantastic, thank you. Jo, when these new materials are brought to market, from a sustainability perspective, what are you finding that designers are asking for from that material? And are there sort of, I suppose I'm thinking about certification or passporting, or, what these new materials now need to demonstrate and how their credentials need to be communicated?
Well, I think first of all, you have to be very careful with new materials because there's a lot of emperor's new clothes. And I think people don't do the deep dive. I'm sure you do, Tom, but but don't do the deep dive into the unintended consequences. I always use the example of, particularly during COVID, suddenly furniture manufacturers thought bamboo was the best thing since sliced bread, and look what we can do with bamboo, because it's the most amazing carbon sink. It grows really quickly. And seriously, bamboo has a huge potential to be the new palm oil. Nothing wrong with palm oil, except for we planted it everywhere and you had this massive monoculture and devastated biodiversity. So there can't be a race to adopt new materials without really understanding the consequences and the why. Why are you doing it? Are you just doing it to get the marketing message out there and saying, hey, listen, are we really sustainable? But in terms of, well, I'm bound to, I have issues with EPDs, so perhaps we won't go there. But on the other hand, it's as good as, people need to have some.
I think you can explain some of the challenges that you think EPDs have created.
Well, first of all, cost, and I know they are coming down in price. Because of the cost, it actually can prevent innovation, because if you spent all this dosh on getting this fabulous EPD, and, typically you're talking 10 to 15,000 pounds, not so much now. I do accept it's coming down. But equally, the boundary rules are such that you're not getting a true picture. You're getting a picture according to the EPD rules. And similarly, if you're not all using the same databases, you're not getting a true parity. And you can't compare one EPD with another without really knowing how it was compiled. But nonetheless, I think it's focusing the mindset. I'm really excited about digital product passports because I'm doing work in them. No, because I think it's transparency. With global supply chains now, it's so hard to know where those materials actually have come from and what their provenance are. Do they come from factories that are using child labour? Have they, do you really know the full supply chain? But more importantly, can you then in the future retrace steps, which we can't do at the moment? I know that's sort of going beyond material into products, but I just feel it's a real game changer. Because so often, if you turn a piece of furniture upside down, I don't suppose we really want to here, but you won't find any labelling on there at all. You won't know who made it, when it was made, whether you can get spare parts. And so what happens? It gets chucked away.
Yeah. Fantastic. And we're going to come back to that global supply chain in just a moment. But before we do, Sam, I want to ask, I know at IHG you work with preferred suppliers, and how does... Can you tell me a little bit more, I suppose, about how that works as far as some of the EPD certification that Joe was just talking about, or just in general, preferred suppliers in relation to sustainability?
I think it's about relationships, trust. You know the level of service you're going to get. So for us to be able to put someone forward to an owner, we need to know that they're going to deliver. We need to know that we're giving a recommendation that someone's going to stand by. So I think everybody on the list is on our IHG's preferred supplier list, which is quite nice. But also it's about price points, it's about quality and warranties. And I think another interesting thing with, sustainability is not just about the product. It's like our owners have a set amount of money and we have to work within that. And we worked with Panaz, where we swapped materials of a mock-up room. We brought the cost down €6,000 per key just by swapping materials. Now, if we multiply that across our hotel room of 300 rooms, that's suddenly huge sums of money for an owner. So it's really, you're talking about the viability of a project or not. And you need to have really open, transparent discussions and trust what you're being told. I don't want to have to second guess someone and look into what I'm being told.
And certainly not any sort of hidden costs.
Absolutely, yeah.
Return on investment is something that I think
Huge.
People are increasingly comfortable in talking about the importance of, especially in the current market.
Absolutely, yeah. An owner, when am I going to get the money back? You're asking me to spend, I think it was insane sum of money when I added it up. It was 30 million just for some soft refurb in a guest room. I was like, oops. But glad it's your money. But, they want to see what they're getting for the money.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So returning to the global supply chain, Tom, I know you have an experience of where perhaps a well-intentioned plan to work with a local supplier, actually that lack of transparency turned out not to be the sustainable approach you'd hoped for. Perhaps you can tell everybody the story.
So I was working on a project in Austria and we found a lighting company. So it was a US lighting company and they manufactured in Austria, which was great. And then we kind of asked them more questions about it. And they were going to have to send the products back once they're manufactured to the US for quality control to then come back to site in Austria. So we were like, obviously this just doesn't really work. And it was just kind of without actually questioning them more. It was like there was no way of actually knowing that.
So it's about that relationship you've got that you feel comfortable to sort of go back and really quiz them a little bit on full exclosure of the process.
Yeah, and it's whether or not, like, if the manufacturer or supplier is getting a bit cagey about kind of the supply chain and it's kind of pushing them, and it's how open they are to actually tell you the supply chain.
Yeah, fantastic. One of the things when we spoke before today's panel that we touched upon was about UK production and how it might support both sustainability targets and craftsmanship values, but that it must also contend with the sort of Brexit era perceptions and a European market resistance. And I can't remember who put that into our conversation.
Sorry.
Sam, thank you.
I know, it's just, since then, the reality of the situation is there's a real bias around placing orders from anyone with a UK registered address. When you're in Europe, they can claim tax back. It's not an issue, but it's part of the process. Right. So it's really, we need to lean into, we have an amazing heritage of weaving, of, the British wool industry, engineering. We have all these wonderful skills that we kind of need to build on. I know Ulster have their dye house up in Dewsbury, as well as obviously their weaving, but it gets lost, and that's the part that there is skill in all of that process. And I think that's what Tom was saying earlier. Yeah. When you go into a factory, you suddenly connect with this, the person who's looking after the loom. It could be anything. Yeah. And you just, you feel this emotional connection to it, and you want to use it. You want to be part of it. So that's
the sort of importance of communicating a full narrative.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah. And have you found the same, Tom, in your work?
I mean, definitely agree with Sam on that. It does.
It's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
Joe, when you talk about your product passporting, to what level are you expecting that to go in when it shows the transparency of a supply chain?
Well, if we look at what's happening under the EU legislation, and the battery passport regulation will have a DPP enforced by February 2027, they have already set the data points that will have to be contained in a passport. And that will go right back through the supply chain to the original source of the material. Because just to say we all know, don't we, say, we bought this wood from wood merchants up the road. Well, the wood didn't come from there. It's going back as far as possible. Now, the regulators will require full disclosure. No two ways about it. And they will be probably enforced by individual member states. But I do know that DEFRA are looking very carefully at DPPs and potentially introducing them here, not least because we have the carbon tax coming in for certain materials coming into the country. And it's a way of making sure they get their tax.
Yeah, absolutely.
And one thing's certain in life, governments will always get taxes.
Absolutely. Jack, I wonder if you would like to comment on how that might relate to to architecture and how you're expecting passporting potentially to impact.
I think it sounds a fantastic step forward. I think there's two things in my mind about this. One is, yes, we do want to understand the nature of the product and where it's come from. And it's not only sustainability. There are other aspects too. There's the wellness stuff that we're interested in, the toxicity, etc., and increasingly fire. So, certification is, I think, increasingly important, being able to rely on it, as we said before. And I don't want to have to be an expert.
Yes.
I want the Fisher-Price version that I can understand. And I hope that is coming down the track.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Joe, one of your favourite topics is about reuse and the importance that will play in sort of commercial interiors. So I just wonder if, what would you like to share about the importance of reuse?
Well, Jack gave me great confidence that life is changing because we were talking about reuse and he was saying how many projects that he's now involved in that is really pushing reuse. I think under certainly EU legislation, we're starting to see green procurement from public sector. And they're demanding, for example, the Dutch government, I think within 2 years, 50% of everything they buy will be reused. And so they're creating that market. Because that's one of the problems with so many commercial products, commercial interiors products, let's get this right, is the fact that there isn't a good reuse market. And so therefore the warehousing space actually is more valuable than the products you're putting in it. And so I just believe it's a waste of time. Keep focusing on getting slightly less carbon in a new product if you're just throwing away vast quantities, because you're throwing away global resources. You must retain the value in those materials that are in the products. And recycling is not the answer.
Jack, perhaps you could share one or two of the examples of the projects where reuse has been key.
Well, the one I'm particularly thinking about was for the FCA in Edinburgh. And under a previous hat, when I was at Perkins & Will heading that up, we designed the FCA in the Olympic Park. And they were simultaneously downsizing in one in London and opening up in Edinburgh. So we were able to reuse a huge amount of particularly furniture, but other products in Edinburgh. But in addition to that, we reused all of the floor tiles. We reused most of the carpets, having taken them out and sorted them out. And we reused at least half the ceilings. So there's a vast amount of materials and products in their Edinburgh office that were reused. And it looks absolutely fine. Yeah. It looks absolutely fine. And I think it's a bit like fashion. You can wear a rather smart jacket with an old pair of jeans and it looks great. There's a mixture of products in there, and it gives a little bit of depth to it as well. It's not who was it? Michael Heseltine said that he didn't like somebody because he thought they had bought all their own furniture. There's depth to having different ages in the environment.
Do you think that the success of that is testament to the longevity and the sort of quality of the pieces in the first place?
Yeah, it has to be. Yeah. And actually, one of the things we were talking about earlier is products that are from very recognizable brands will be reused longer and longer than other, more commodified products. Right. And I was surprised, again, I was talking with Joanna, because I've moved office recently and I got some of my old office chairs at home and I thought I would reuse them in my own office. Yeah. And then I looked up, they are worth £2,500 each and I bought them in 1985. Wow.
Yeah, but Jack, that's not the norm though, is it? I mean,
well, it is for me.
Okay. Alice, I did want to add to that. I've just been working on a university project, a very well, I can't say the name, but a very well-known university, one of the oldest in the country. And they have a very beautiful new building, passive house built. And they made the decision to reuse as much as possible. And it was interesting, though. They didn't know what they got. This was furniture. And so before we could do anything, we had to undertake an asset survey to actually see what they'd got, then do a condition score at the same time. But we managed to reuse over 2,500 items of furniture without undermining the design intent of the building, because we did plan it carefully as to where this reused furniture would go. And that represented 72 tons of embodied carbon. And that's the equivalent of 2 return flights to Hong Kong.
That's a fantastic example. Thank you, Joe.
I 4 years ago, I took a new job as chair of the RIBA, as I was billed earlier. And so they had to get me an office, and we didn't have any furniture. So I scouted around and I found some furniture that was about to be thrown out. And I thought, well, we can repurpose this. And they needed a little bit of renovation, and we renovated them as good as new. And they were the highest quality Corbusier sofas that you can buy, and they were worth £20,000.
Wow. I need to come second-hand shopping with you, Jack. That's it, exactly. I'm interested, those examples from the sort of education sector and the workplace sector are really interesting. Thank you for sharing those. I'm interested, Sam and Tom, if you have a reuse strategy as part of your work.
I think every project has to be seen on its own merits. I'm saying it's clearly an architectural practice if they had Corbusier sofas, because I don't think the rest of us not working on an IHG budget. I think I can see a model in the future where luxury hotels take furniture to some kind of hub, and it's a bit like the Vinted version of furniture. Yes. Vinted has just been voted the highest. The most popular retail store in France or something like that recently. But this idea of reuse and it is more and more acceptable now. I think nobody's necessarily looking for some shiny veneer. It needs to have soul and it needs to have purpose. Exactly. But equally, it's, we should be doing this like breathing. I don't think it's the brand. There are some hospitality brands leaning into it and they've built the brand on it, but guests are fickle. They'll move on and something else will be there. So it needs to be a solution which is long-term. Yes. And, the good quality stuff is maybe appropriate to a Carlton can that has longevity and it has history, but maybe something like a Voco Henry and Indigo. Maybe they are more trend. Maybe they're pieces that can be taken apart and reused and remade. Or furniture that has multiple functions.
It's storytelling, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because the younger generation, and I say this not as the younger generation, but are interested because of vintage success. So they have to understand that story behind the piece and understand why it's been reused, because otherwise it's just like shabby old bit of furniture.
Exactly. And I think a lot we get sustainability is blended with this shabby chic. And it's not. Luxury can be sustainable and you shouldn't see it. You don't have to see that it's sustainable. It's about just making really good choices the first time around.
But also making choices, especially when you're looking at sort of furniture, that it's fit for purpose, that it's not a domestic item that wouldn't pass a severe contract testing and is put in the wrong setting.
Yeah, absolutely. It's understanding your craft. I think a lot of the time we're talking to designers, it's a skill and it's a craft, as Tom and I have discussed this a lot. Tom?
Yeah. So straight away, as soon as we're doing a refurbished project, it's walking around the hotel and actually kind of going through every item, like whether it's actually hard finishes, whether it's joinery, whether it's loose pieces, and actually going like, what can we do to this to actually give it a new lease of life and actually make that part of the concept that we're coming up with. So it's an automatic for us.
So should suppliers be expected to offer a take-back service?
No.
Go on.
Sorry.
Back and forth.
We've had this. So take-back's great if it's suitable. But again, it's like, what suits that project? What is it? I think what would be much better is a QR system where you pick your carpet up and there's a QR code for the guy that, I don't know, however long the carpet's lasted. It's like, this is what you do at the end of life. Or even here's the manufacturer's details, buy some more carpet.
Coming back to passporting.
Yeah. It is. But historically, you used to get a room book And the GM would have it. The GM leaves, it's stuffed, it's covered in dust, nobody looks at it. So where's the history? You know, we've got so much product innovation at the moment. There's fantastic new mattress out from Hypnos. There's, you know, fabric innovations, there's carpet innovations. The designer knows when they're specifying and it goes in and everybody understands it, but it's at the end of life, and who keeps that story? Who knows what to do?
Fantastic, thank you. Jo, just bringing the conversation back to you. With carbon as a dominant metric, how do we ensure that other critical sustainability factors aren't overlooked?
It's you guys. You have to recognize that carbon is not the only metric. Yeah. And I think it's also the acceptance, and end user occupiers as well, or, you know, hotel owners have to realize that there is a consequence to wanting shiny and new, and that's a carbon consequence. Just to cover off also the take back point, I think it's really tricky for manufacturers. And I think that's where collaboration is going to be so important, because you won't be buying all of the FF&E within your hotel will not come from one single supplier, I'm quite sure. And so how do you manage the reverse logistics for that? And so, yes, it's part of the equation, take back, but it's not the only part. And I think the service sector, but I've forgotten carbon. Sorry. You know me.
That's okay. That's okay. Yes, carbon.
I think the trouble is, and I'm going to give the example of wool. Wool actually is very heavy in carbon, in theory, because of the way carbon is measured. So hence why you cannot simply look at a carbon figure and say, well, that's greener than that because it's slightly less in carbon.
And I think that's where there's a real difficulty, because you're not with sustainability initiatives between companies. Suppliers are making huge strides, but they might be making those in slightly different directions and prioritizing what fits best for their product type. And so then you're not comparing, you know, apples with apples, are you?
The argument back again, whenever I've made comments about carbon, I tend to get shouted down and said, but we're in a climate emergency. Well, if you look at the circular economy, it's been shown that it can reduce carbon impact by up to, I think it's nearly 40%. So, you know, we're just not about how do we make new things slightly less in carbon.
Fantastic, thank you. So I want to talk a little bit about British made. Obviously, we've been invited here by 5 British manufacturers. Do British made products contribute to guest experience and a sort of an emotional resonance of the space? Do you think that the guests understand or need to understand where the materials in the room they're staying in have come from? I'm coming to you first, Jo, and then
I think Tom and I tag team on this. I think you want some honesty about where you are, and the materiality. It doesn't matter where you are in the world, gives you that, and some connection with your environment. Whether a guest wants it, I think that really depends on the guest and the brand. I think you can lean into that, and there are a number of brands that do that. I mean, with Indigo, we have a local narrative around that, so it makes perfect sense. If that's somewhere where there is a product made, it makes perfect sense to champion that, and it gives a really good story. People feel connected with the area. Yeah.
What do you think, Tom? Do you communicate that sort of materiality narrative and product narrative directly to the guests? And do you feel like it's important to them?
So it definitely does just vary depending on the guest, but when there is like a strong narrative and actually that's passed on to the staff during opening, and then they actually pass that story on when they're kind of checking in the guests and all of that, then it does become more ingrained in the whole concept. And actually, yeah, I think it does get the guests more kind of excited about those things and understanding a bit more.
And it brings them into the conversation as well. They're part of the process. Yeah, fantastic. So now no more hands up, but you do have the opportunity to ask Jack or Sam or Tom or Jo a question of your own. And like I said, please don't be shy. I know that once one person has asked a question, others will follow. So would anybody like to ask the first question? Well done, David. maybe just project. Oh, we have a roaming mic.
With warning scale. There we go. So we talk a lot about circularity and also talking a lot about what to do with products at the end of their life. One thing that's not been mentioned in here and something I've become more and more aware of in recent years is a lot of hotels using auctions to put products directly into a second channel, which then immediately puts them into a second use, which can be much longer because the budgets for second generation hotels are obviously tight, so they may run 10 to 15 years. What's the panel's view on extending life by taking it from 5-star to 4-star to 3-star and running down through those operations?
Great question, well done, David. Who would...
Well, I'll jump in and say I think that's great because ultimately you're still preserving the materials within that and extending the life cycle for as long as possible. And if that means, because by doing less to something, you're actually, because often if you're doing a lot of renovation work, you're actually adding to the carbon. So by doing less is the best thing you can do. The least you do, the better in many ways. Sorry.
We've been saying that a lot recently. It's a brilliant in principle, and I think we would support it all the time. And we've tested it. The problem is we're being charged to take the product away, and and I say we. So every hotel has a different owner. So this is where the business model affects it. So each owner is being charged to take the product away. It's not just a case of let's take it out of an intercon and put it into a Holiday Inn. If we could change that, that would work. And in fact, we attended a talk, the Zero Carbon Forum, which has been set up in the UK for the hospitality industry. We listened to a guy from Wagamama's that I keep sharping on it. They actually take their furniture away from venues, refurbish it, and keep it in stock ready for the next hotel opening. So I can see that model somehow working if we could get warehousing and it was economical and you could put it back in. So there's definitely something there. I just think the whole thing needs to evolve more to cater for the sort of financial model that hospitality has.
Were there two models there? You mentioned an auction.
So I'm aware of a company that runs an auction facility that specifically, so we work with them because some of our divans, for example, have an advanced value for them. So they almost like for a used car, use a GFV. Right. If you've got this, it's 5 years old, it's in good condition, we'll give you a higher purchase back value, covers the financial model off, so it's outside of group. So the auction model is what then becomes interesting. They then collect that up and either through a post-purchase registered hoteliers type site, or they will actually run, and they've recently done one at Savoy, where they basically purchased everything out of there and ran the auction. I never get to see the other side of it. I just find it fascinating because I think it's a great use to take what is usable. Certain products for hygiene reasons and everything else will always need to go somewhere else. Mm-hmm. That's a reality of life. But what can be done in that is a best case.
I think that's really interesting. And I can imagine extending it not to other markets, for the office market, for instance, people moving offices and holding auctions back into the market for other people to pick up. So, yeah. I
can touch base on that. Our entire office is furnished from a unnamed bank office that was open just before COVID. They used it for 36 days, shut the thing down and put everything off-site into storage and never used it ever again.
Wow. Timing's normally the issue.
Just love
it's the problem with offices and probably hotels. I'm going to be slightly controversial, Alice.
Never, Joe.
And say, why do you have to own furniture?
I used to work, I did the Savoy refurb, so I know all about that one. But fundamentally, the value is because it was in the Savoy, and most of the furniture is actually very strange 1980s refurbishment for, reproduction furniture, and it's very big. But it's really good when, if it's a divan base that hasn't reached what we would consider its end of life, there is huge value in all of that. You can rent furniture. So I worked years ago for a company that rented furniture. So the model was you rented it out, someone pays, 2 or 3 years.
A subscription model.
Subscription model. It comes back, it gets refurbed. Yes. So it's just who's going to invest in the warehousing to store the furniture? So it's purely there's a sort of gap in the market, and we're moving that way. It's just who's going to get there first.
But it's accountancy practices that's holding that back.
Yeah.
Because if you don't own it, it's not your asset, and so it doesn't sit on the balance sheet. If it's a subscription, it sits on the P&L and hurts the P&L. I mean, isn't that a madness? You know, back in the day, when I was a kid, we used to rent televisions because they were too expensive to own. We can learn from the past.
Okay, we have to take the mic off David now. Somebody else would like a question. Can we pass it back a row? Yeah, 2 rows. There we go. Fantastic. Thank you.
Hello. Hi, thank you so much.
Oh, is it on?
Is it?
Just shout. Project.
I don't. Yeah, I'm just gonna have to shout.
There we go.
Now
It's on
it's working. Thank you so much for the talk. My question to the panel is on sort of the decisions when making purchase decisions initially on more expensive materials that are going to be more sustainable long term. Obviously, one of the sticking points is how to demonstrate that extra expense is going to be worth it and going to make sure that things maintain long term.
So it's back to that return on investment, but over the period of time, how you might communicate that.
Correct. And my query is, I'm presuming obviously financial directors are some of the key decision makers there. But just a question to the panel on who else are the decision makers and what metrics do you reckon we need in order to really effectively communicate the value, the long-term value that these more expensive materials upfront will give in terms of sustainability and probably also enhance customer experience?
Fantastic question. Tomo, do you want to? I was just thinking, Sam, your example of actually pick the mic up.
I was just thinking your example that you were saying earlier about the cost of the more sustainable option actually wasn't.
Sorry, yeah, I kind of think there's a little bit of a myth around sustainability being expensive. I think some things are more expensive, but I think everything is on balance. So we did an exercise on a fit out in Bloomsbury, and the site had costed for skip hire. There's a company who have gone into partnership with a recycling company. So they bring the skip, they all separate all the material on site, wood, timber, glass. It's cheaper to hire their skips than it is to hire the skips just from, the skip hire company. So I think, when we talk about more costly, that's not always the case. I think the bottom line is the owner pays. The owner will always pay. If you can, you got to pick your battles. If they understand the value to the sustainable reasoning, then they'll buy into it. There's a new software called Medaster that will predict the raw material value in years to come. That's the kind of language that our owners will listen to. You don't have to worry about what the material looks like or anything. But if you can say your building costs, estimated value is X amount of million, the interior estimated value in 10 years will be this. That's kind of what they want to hear.
That's fantastic terminology. Jack?
Yeah, I think, perhaps durability was one of the qualities that you're thinking about, as well as whether it looks lovely. I guess that, a product which may be more expensive, may even have more carbon in it initially, that's going to last twice as long as a cheaper alternative that you're going to have to replace. In that, the equation has got to be taken into account. And I'm reminded of the case that Porsche always make about their motor cars, because I've forgotten the statistic, but it's something like 80% of all Porsches ever made are still running on the road. And therefore they are very, the carbon in that is well preserved, and it's a good product to buy despite its expense.
Fantastic, thank you. We've got time for one more question if anybody has a question they'd like to ask. No, okay. Oh, well done, good.
Hello. I was just wondering, in an age of understanding health and well-being, in a hotel environment, for example, what effect does that have on your design and your material choices? Whether that does indeed have that effect.
Wonderful. So health and well-being.
I guess it massively has to kind of take that into account when you are looking. It's like, I guess, every property, but especially when you are looking at the kind of the heavy wellness properties. But it's another aspect that we want to take into account and that we need to take into account. So I guess it's just getting the information and understanding the information from all the manufacturers.
I think there's an enormous volume of information and touch points that designers need to communicate to their clients, aren't there? You know, your expertise is enormous.
Yeah. I mean, when you go anywhere, it's a sensory experience. Touch is part of it. If you're all the materials are giving you more information about where you are. So natural things generally bode better in an environment, but it's not just that, there's 136 million people in Europe registered disabled. So that's not just, 2% of that are people in wheelchairs. Yeah. So we have taken out some things like electronic hand dryers, people with neurological disorders. That's a real big problem for them. And it's such a simple thing for us to do. So it's, when we're talking sustainability environment, it's everything. We have what's called a regenerative table on Intercon. So we put our desk table by the window so that you're benefiting from the natural light. That doesn't take a great deal, but it's everything that changes your emotive experience of being in the area.
Wonderful. Thanks, Sam. Yes, yeah.
I think sustainability and wellness really are two sides of the same coin. And it's always struck me that the purpose of a building is to protect you. If you can imagine some climates where you wouldn't really need buildings. But the whole purpose of a building is to protect you. And if it doesn't protect you, it's a sort of sin, with toxic materials, lousy air conditioning, et cetera, poor water quality. So, I think it goes to the very root of why we have buildings in that, the wellness quotient needs to make sure that you are protected.
What a great note to finish on, Jack. Thank you so much. Now, before we all stay and enjoy some wonderful food and drink and socialising and chat, there are a few thank yous. Obviously, in a moment, I'm going to thank our speakers, but it's no small effort to bring 5 brands together and orchestrate an evening like this. So I would like to first thank Rita Bancroft for putting this evening together. Thank you so much, Rita. And so please join me for another round of applause to thank this evening's speakers for Jack, Sam, Tom and Joe. Thank you all for sharing your expertise. Thank you so much. And please do make sure that you take some time to speak with the brands that brought you here today, which is Panaz, Hypnos, Sanderson. I shouldn't have tested myself, shouldn't I? Sanderson, Newmor and Harlequin. Thank you so much. Thank you. Oh, and Ulster Carpets. Thank you.